once all these things are settled, then we can just go down to digging data, which is, like I said, it could be a very elaborate task, and you also mentioned that in your speech, Dr. Cornelius. Yeah, but nowadays we have, let's say, at least some kind of default or generic data for quite many processes in commercial databases. So it's rather if you want to do more specific or more, let's say, different types of studies that this very elaborate task comes into play. Okay, next please. Yes, there is probably a quite interesting point to make here because, well, not only probably, I mean, the reason I included this slide is because there is an interesting point to make. Those of you who have been engaged in life cycle assessment studies probably have sometime heard the response to a question saying that, well, your choice depends on the goal and scope definition, or something similar. So it goes back to the questions I had in my list before, but it's also now important to look a little bit. So what are the different goals and scopes that are at stake here? Well, we can distinguish a few different types, maybe you could say, of life cycle assessment studies. The chart is then structuring this area into 6 fields, and it's defined in this direction or on this dimension, whether it's looking at the past or the present, so it's processes that actually takes place or have taken place. So in theory you can actually know the real data. Then of course you have some kind of future-oriented studies, and it's hard to guess about the future, and of course you cannot know exactly what is going to happen, so that's the reason for this division. And then when it comes to the specific type of studies, it's, well, let's say the traditional LCA, and where it started was mainly on the product level. And in fact the most often referred to reason to do life cycle assessment was to be able to use it in product development. But what you had to do initially was actually to know the performance of your product as it is or has been recently produced. So then we come into this field rather. So you base the future predictions based on the current situation basically. So this is typically what happens. And nowadays we talk a lot about environmental product declarations. In the European arena there is a lot of talk going on about product environmental footprints, which is more or less the same thing but only with the EU label on it. And so this cow model discussion has actually been going on within the framework of this PEF discussion that's driven by the Commission. So over time it's been then more and more interesting to use the life cycle assessment concept on more aggregated levels, like on sector level, for example. In fact, some of the early stage data that was publicly available was derived for something like an industry LCI, life cycle inventory average. In particular, I'm thinking about the data that the Plastics Europe, or as they were called in those days, Association of Plastics Manufacturers Europe, APME, data. They started publish data already in 1992, and they aim to cover at least a significant part of the industry. And of course, another area that was fairly early on the stage was to do waste planning, trying to look at different options for waste management in a broad sense and trying to optimize the system. So that's more of a kind of, not a product development, but a sector management development target. And I guess if you look more recently, we have seen increasing amount of studies going on to monitor the impacts of a whole country or a whole, well, region like the EU. So there is a lot of work going on here on the EU level, and again, referring to the study that Matthias will present, it's an example of this kind of study. The future-oriented counterpart of this one is to use this in order to set and then try to follow up on sustainability targets somehow. Okay, next please. And again. Let's scroll down. That's fine. No. That's good. Okay, very basic. Dr. Cornelius mentioned that the LCA is output-oriented, which is at least partly true because it's more developed on the output side. So you have a number of emissions coming out from life cycle system, and these emissions are, let's say, multiple, so you want to do some kind of aggregation. The LCA structure typically is divided into two phases or two steps in this aggregation. One is then based mainly on natural sciences, so what is the actual contribution in molecular or physical or chemical sense to these different effects that are listed on the midpoint effect level. Next please. And then we come into the area that was relating to the title of this presentation, so the normalization and weighting part. And basically it's about trying to assess the importance of these different impacts to each other. Okay, we can go on for a few more. Stop there. Thank you. So yeah, I started with these three because they have been established for quite some time. More recently, the various contributions to toxic impacts have been elaborated. It's, well, more complicated from the sense that you have a lot of different mechanisms involved, whereas in these three areas, for example, you can more easily come up with an agreement on what is the dominating mechanism and then deal with that one. But of course there are still, let's say, development opportunities for all these three areas as well. Nevertheless, if we look at the full range, or an extended range of various categories, you can say that there are some categories that are, reasonably well developed in terms of how to deal with this characterization step, whereas there are some other categories that are under discussion and not so well developed. I guess recently water use has been fairly well developed into the water footprint discussion of water use in LCA. Like I mentioned, there are developments going on in the human toxicity and ecotoxicity. It's still difficult because there are so many substances involved, different mechanisms involved, so it's really cumbersome to derive or come up with new characterization factors, but basically the methodology is there for quite many substances. Land use is difficult only because the mechanisms are very difficult, and as Dr. Cornelius mentioned, you have the ecosystem services resource use issues that are difficult to capture in the LCA so far, and biodiversity is probably even more difficult because it doesn't even have a, let's say, coherent conceptual framework that can be applied in an LCA context until now. But work is going on, obviously. Next, please. This is the same slide basically, but in recent years there has been like a shift from these traditional category descriptors to more of these footprint names, and this is also then visible in this product environmental footprint process, although it's not necessarily so that the PEF will lead to a single score or aggregated effect method or system, but there is work going on at least to have it more harmonized on the European level weighting scheme among the different impact categories. Okay, next please. So let's go then into a little bit the impacts more specifically. Next. And let's roll down one more. That's it. And one more. Yes. Okay. There are three basic methods how to aggregate it from these disaggregated emissions or resource inputs to some kind of impact score that covers all these effects. And basically, you have the three methods of expert panels relating to environmental standards or monetarization. Of course, you can always see that there could be linkages and relations between them, but the basic ideas is like this at least. And to give you the overview here of what it means, well, the expert panel method would mean that, like, yeah, let's compare or ask some, well, experts, or in fact it could be any layman that is asked in a survey. What do you think is the, well, order of severity for a number of categories, for example? And so obviously this will always come up with an answer, because anyone is entitled to have their belief one way or the other. Obviously different people will think differently, so if you have a group of people that you ask about this, you will come up with a range of different answers. So the difficult part of this process is to approach something that everybody can, let's say, accept. It's unfair to think that everybody would agree to the details of this ranking, but I've run some exercises with students and also with professional well, people working in industry with product development and purchasing and so on. And normally it's possible to reach some kind of consensus about a certain order of or ranking of different environmental impacts. Not necessarily will everybody agree in the end, but at least in the end everybody will understand why the others did it.